The Watchtower's sensors screamed a warning that no one expected to hear, not because the technology was faulty, but because what it detected shouldn't have existed within 300 miles of Earth's atmosphere. Superman stood at the observation deck, his crystalline blue eyes fixed on the dimensional anomaly materializing above the Indian Ocean, approximately 200 miles from the station's position. The energy signature pulsed with something ancient, something that didn't fit neatly into any category the Justice League's vast database had ever compiled. It wasn't Kryptonian. It wasn't Amazonian. It wasn't magical in the way Zatanna or Constantine wielded magic. It was something else entirely, raw, primal, and utterly foreign to this world. "Batman, we have a situation," Superman's voice carried that particular calm that always preceded crisis. Years of stopping apocalypses had taught him to deliver catastrophe with the same tone he used to order coffee. Within seconds, Batman materialized on the comm system, his gravelly voice cutting through the white noise of the Watchtower's operations. Details. Energy surge consistent with a dimensional breach. No warning signatures from our early detection systems. Whatever this is, it opened instantaneously. Superman leaned forward, his hands gripping the reinforced edge of the observation window. Even for a being who had stared into the sun and lived, this felt unsettling. The energy readings resembled nothing in the League's collective experience. The dimensional tier expanded like a wound in reality itself, silver-white light cascading around its edges. It hung suspended for exactly 7 seconds, an eternity when measured in potential catastrophes. Before collapsing inward with a sound that nobody heard but everyone felt. A concussive pulse of energy rippled outward, causing the Watchtower to shudder and its alarms to shriek in protest. Then, silence. And falling through the dissipating light came 2 figures. The first was unmistakable even at this distance, a humanoid shape radiating an aura of pure supernatural power. Tall, impossibly graceful mid-fall, with hair the color of moonlight streaming behind like silver ribbons. The second figure was smaller, clinging desperately to the first, a child with auburn hair whose screams were lost in the chaos of the dimensional collapse. Superman's superhearing caught the words, "Sesshomaru. Sesshomaru, I'm scared." The tall figure twisted mid-air with inhuman grace, positioning himself beneath the falling child. The moment before impact, a shimmering barrier of pure energy erupted from his palms, cushioning their descent and halting their fall exactly 3 meters above the Watchtower's outer hull. The figure landed with impossible grace on the reinforced plating, his feet making barely a sound despite the fall. Wonder Woman and Flash arrived within seconds, materializing from interior corridors with weapons and defensive stances ready. Superman was already moving, his invulnerability and strength making him the logical first responder, but he kept his hands open, non-threatening. The stranger's eyes snapped upward, irises so pale they seemed almost colorless, containing depths of ancient power that Superman recognized instinctively. This wasn't a being newly powered by accident or cosmic radiation. This was something that had walked the earth for centuries, perhaps millennia. The Demon Lord's gaze locked onto Superman's, and in that moment, the Man of Steel felt something he rarely experienced, uncertainty about whether he could win. "State your nature and intent," Wonder Woman commanded, her lasso of truth gleaming at her side. "You've breached a secure facility. Identify yourselves immediately." The silver-haired being turned slowly to face them, moving with the deliberate grace of a predator confident in its dominance. His expression was utterly impassive, yet there was something in his eyes that suggested infinite patience and infinite danger coexisting in the same gaze. He wore traditional clothing that looked like it belonged to feudal Japan, white and red fabric, elegant and deadly, and his claws caught the light as he gently set the child on the Watchtower's deck. "Rin, stay behind me," he said, his voice carrying an accent that suggested English wasn't his native language. The words were spoken with complete authority, and the child obeyed instantly, pressing herself against his back with the absolute trust of someone who had learned that his word was law. "I am Sesshomaru," he said, addressing the 3 heroes without deference or recognition of their authority. "This is Rin." We do not come by choice. A rift opened in our world. It brought us here. We are not your enemies, unless you make us so. Superman took a measured step forward, his mind already running through protocols. I'm Superman. This is Wonder Woman and the Flash. You're safe, but we need to understand what happened. Where are you from? What caused the dimensional breach? Sesshomaru's eyes narrowed slightly, as though he found the question both quaint and tedious. A place your science cannot explain. A time when humans and demons coexisted. Rin was attacked by a creature trying to exploit the breach. I defended her. We fell through. The clinical simplicity of his explanation contradicted the cosmic violence that had just unfolded across their sensors. Superman's enhanced perception studied every detail, the way Sesshomaru's claws seemed to shimmer with barely contained energy, the faint aura of supernatural power that even Superman could sense radiating from him, the absolute absence of fear in his expression. We need to bring you inside, Flash said, already moving. Get you both checked over by our medical team, figure out what's. No, Sesshomaru interrupted, his voice carrying a finality that made even the speedster pause. We will not be examined, scanned, or restrained. We will not answer to your government authorities. We will not submit to your protocols. Wonder Woman's hand moved to her lasso. That's not your choice to make. You've appeared in our world unannounced, a significant threat. I am not a threat to those who do not threaten me or the child, Sesshomaru said, his eyes moving to meet hers with absolute steadiness. And I do not fear you, warrior woman. I see in you the remnants of ancient codes. I respect that. But I will not be caged. Superman recognized the moment, the instant before conflict became inevitable. But he also recognized something else. The way Sesshomaru's hand rested protectively near Rin. The way his absolute confidence never wavered. This being wasn't posturing, he genuinely did not fear them. That was either the sign of a being of supreme power or supreme ignorance, and Superman's instincts screamed that it was the former. If you want to stay on this station, Superman said carefully, you'll need to follow some basic rules. We're not here to hurt you or Rin. We're here to help. But we need to understand what we're dealing with. Sesshomaru seemed to consider this, and for a moment, the demon lord's expression shifted, not to kindness, but to something approaching recognition. The child will stay safe. That is my only concern. Your rules are secondary. It wasn't agreement, but it was a starting point. Behind Superman, Batman's voice crackled over the comm system, having watched the entire encounter through the Watchtower's external cameras. We have a problem. Argus is already picking up the energy signatures. Amanda Waller's people are mobilizing. They'll be here within the hour. Superman closed his eyes for just a moment. The complications were already multiplying, and they hadn't even begun to understand what Sesshomaru truly was. Welcome to Earth, Superman said finally, extending his hand. We have a lot to talk about. Sesshomaru looked at the offered hand with the expression of someone examining a curious artifact. Then, without taking it, he turned toward the entrance to the Watchtower's interior. Lead the way, he said. But understand this, if anyone attempts to separate me from the child, your Justice League will learn why I am called the most powerful demon in the feudal era. As he walked past Superman toward the access port, the Man of Steel felt it, a wave of supernatural pressure that made even his Kryptonian physiology shudder. This was not a being that Superman could simply overpower. This was something far more complex and far more dangerous. And somewhere in the depths of the Watchtower's servers, Batman was already compiling files, running analyses, and developing contingencies. The game had begun. The Watchtower's conference room was designed to intimidate, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Earth, holographic displays capable of rendering real-time threat assessments, a table that could seat the world's greatest heroes. But as Sesshomaru sat across from Superman, Wonder Woman, and Flash, with Rin perched nervously beside him, it became clear that the room's architectural menace was meaningless to someone who had conquered kingdoms. Batman watched from the shadows, as was his custom, taking in every detail. The way Sesshomaru's claws had retracted to appear almost human. The way his eyes tracked every camera, every sensor, every potential exit with the precision of a general surveying enemy territory. The way he never, not once, looked away from Rin unless he was directly addressing one of them. "Let's start with basics," Superman began, his hands folded on the table in a gesture meant to convey openness rather than threat. "You mentioned you're from another world. Another dimension. What's the nature of that world? Is it technologically advanced? Does it have a civilization structure we should be aware of?" Sesshomaru's pale eyes studied Superman with the detached curiosity of someone examining a particularly interesting specimen. "My world exists in what you would call your past. Feudal Japan, roughly 500 years prior to your current technological era. But time and space do not align as your science suggests. We exist in a realm where demons, yokai, are native, and humans coexist in uneasy balance with beings of supernatural power." "Yokai," Zatanna said, entering the conference room with her characteristic elegance. The sorceress immediately sensed the wrongness of Sesshomaru's energy signature, and her expression shifted from curiosity to profound fascination. "That's not a term in Western demonology. The magical taxonomy doesn't." She paused, approaching slowly, her hands raised in the universal gesture of non-aggression. "May I?" Sesshomaru inclined his head slightly, and Zatanna extended her hand without touching him, feeling the magical aura that surrounded him like an invisible flame. Her eyes widened. This isn't demonic magic in the way we understand it. This is something older. Primal. It's not born from chaos or infernal pacts. It's just, what he is." "Precisely," Sesshomaru said, something approaching approval in his voice. "Your sorceress understands what your science cannot quantify. I do not wield magic as you understand it. I am magic. My existence is rooted in the fundamental forces of my world." Batman leaned forward from his position in the shadows. "That's a problem. If you're not bound by the laws of magic as we understand them, we have no idea what your actual power levels are. No idea what you're capable of. No idea how to contain you if you become a threat." "I will not become a threat," Sesshomaru said with the absolute certainty of someone for whom the concept of failure was theoretical rather than practical. "Unless your league provokes one." "That's not reassuring," Flash interjected, his fingers drumming against the table in that constant, restless motion that characterized the speedster's perpetual energy. "Look, no disrespect, but we've dealt with a lot of, I'm incredibly powerful and won't be a threat situations. Usually ends with us fighting in downtown Metropolis." Rin made a small sound, something between a whimper and a sigh, and Sesshomaru's expression shifted in a way barely perceptible to anyone but Batman. The hard angles of his features softened fractionally, and one of his clawed hands moved to gently stroke the child's hair. "Rin has endured much," he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that suggested centuries of experience behind those words. "She was a slave before I found her. She was bound to suffering as a fact of existence. I took her under my protection because it was my choice to do so. That choice shapes all that I do. I will not allow her to be harmed. I will not allow her to be used. And I will not allow your fears to dictate my actions." Wonder Woman, who had been silent until now, leaned back in her chair with the expression of someone reassessing their opponent. "You claim she's your responsibility. What's your relationship to her? Is she your child?" "She is what I have chosen to protect," Sesshomaru replied, which wasn't quite an answer but contained more truth than most explanations would have. "In my world, that bond is more sacred than blood." Superman's expression softened slightly. "We understand. The Justice League is built on similar principles. We protect those who can't protect themselves. But we need you to understand our position. We have protocols. Government oversight. We can't just accept a new variable in our calculations without proper assessment. Your protocols are irrelevant to me, Sesshomaru said flatly. What matters is whether your Justice League is capable of honoring basic agreements. Can you protect Rin? Can you provide her with a safe location while I determine how to return her to our world? If yes, we have agreement. If no, I will simply take her and find another location. It was a simple statement of fact, delivered with such utter conviction that even Superman, who had faced down gods and aliens, felt the weight of it. This being wasn't making threats. He was simply stating his position on an immutable truth. He would protect the child. That was non-negotiable. We can protect her, Batman said, finally stepping fully into the light. His cowl caught the fluorescent glow of the conference room, rendering his expression even more unreadable than usual. But that requires trust. Trust means answering our questions. Trust means cooperation. Sesshomaru studied Batman with an intensity that made even the Dark Knight shift slightly in his stance. You are the leader of this world's shadows. The one who commands through intellect and preparation. Rather than raw power. You fear what you cannot calculate. You believe you can construct contingencies for any threat. It's kept me alive this long, Batman replied, meeting that pale gaze without flinching. Then we understand each other, Sesshomaru said, and something that might have been respect flickered across his expression. Ask your questions. I will answer honestly, not out of your fear, but because Rin's safety depends on you understanding what I am capable of protecting her from. For the next 3 hours, the Justice League conducted their assessment. Zatanna attempted to measure the magical aura, only to find it resisted quantification. It was like trying to measure the ocean with a cup. Superman tried to gauge his physical durability, asking questions about injuries, recovery times, and vulnerabilities. Sesshomaru answered each question with clinical precision, revealing a being whose regenerative abilities bordered on the miraculous, whose speed and strength exceeded most metahumans' parameters, and whose combat experience spanned centuries. How many battles have you fought? Wonder Woman asked, and the question hung in the air like a challenge. More than your civilization has existed, Sesshomaru replied. I have conquered territories. I have defeated demons whose power rivaled gods. I have been stabbed, poisoned, burned, and shattered. I have always healed. I have always risen again. And in all of those centuries, I have never faced an opponent who could genuinely harm me until I chose to protect something beyond myself. He glanced toward Rin, who had fallen asleep against his shoulder, her small hand gripping the fabric of his white hakama. That child changed everything, he continued, his voice dropping to something almost introspective. Power without something to protect is merely destruction waiting to happen. But power wielded to safeguard something precious, that becomes purpose. Superman exchanged a look with Wonder Woman, and the Amazonian warrior nodded slightly. She had fought alongside gods who had experienced similar revelations. She understood the weight of discovering that immortal strength meant nothing without something worth preserving. We can provide safe quarters, Superman said finally. But we need to brief the other League members. We need to establish clear protocols about what happens next. And we need to address the fact that Argus knows you're here. As if on cue, Batman's communicator erupted with urgent chatter. Amanda Waller's voice crackled through the encrypted channel, ice-cold and authoritative. We have containment teams mobilizing. Justice League, you have 1 hour to turn over the dimensional anomaly for secure federal custody, or we take it ourselves. The room fell silent. Sesshomaru's eyes opened fully, ancient power radiating from him like heat from a forge. Who is this Amanda Waller? Someone who believes she has the authority to command us, Batman replied, already accessing the secure encrypted channels that connected to Argus. She runs Task Force X, the Suicide Squad. She doesn't negotiate. She demands. Then she will be disappointed, Sesshomaru said, his claws extending slowly, each one catching the light with an almost hypnotic gleam. I do not belong to anyone. Rin does not belong to anyone. And no government, no matter how vast its resources, will take either of us. Superman felt it then, the same pressure he'd sensed on the Watchtower's hull, but amplified now, filling the conference room with an almost suffocating presence. This was a being preparing for war, and the casual certainty with which he did so suggested he'd won such wars before. We'll handle Amanda Waller, Superman said, making a decision that would set events in motion he couldn't yet foresee. You have our protection. But understand, that protection has limits. If you harm innocents, if you become the threat we fear you might be, we will stop you. Sesshomaru regarded Superman for a long moment, then nodded with finality. Then we have agreement. And your Batman should know, he is wise to prepare contingencies against me. That is the first sign of a warrior who might actually present me with an interesting challenge. As Batman processed whether that was a compliment or a veiled threat, Superman contacted the rest of the Justice League. Green Lantern, Aquaman, and Hawkgirl were en route within the hour. The question was no longer whether they could contain Sesshomaru. The question was whether they could survive what came next. The Watchtower's magical containment chamber was designed for entities beyond standard metahuman classification. Its walls were reinforced with blessed silver, infused with runes from a dozen mystical traditions, and maintained by a continuous feed of magical energy channeled through Zatanna's personal sanctum. It had held demons, gods, and entities from the darkest corners of the magical spectrum. Sesshomaru stood in the center of that chamber, absolutely still, while Zatanna conducted her analysis. The sorceress moved through the space with practiced grace, her hands tracing patterns of magical energy, her eyes glowing with the weight of arcane sight. Around her, holographic displays rendered readings that made no sense. Power signatures that fluctuated wildly, energy outputs that exceeded safe parameters, magical resonance patterns that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. This is impossible, Zatanna whispered, not to Sesshomaru but to herself, to the universe, to the fundamental laws of magic that she had spent decades mastering. Your energy signature, it's not contained. It's not being suppressed by the chamber. It's just, coexisting with it. Like you're occupying the same space but operating on a completely different frequency. Your magic is derived, Sesshomaru said, his voice carrying no inflection, merely stating fact. Learned. Practiced. Mine is intrinsic. It is not magic you cast, it is magic that I am. The distinction is important. Wonder Woman stood at the observation window beside Superman, watching the exchange with the keen eye of a warrior analyzing another warrior's technique. He's right, she said quietly. I've fought entities with power drawn from external sources, gods who rely on divine authority, sorcerers who channel forces beyond themselves. But this, he's not channeling anything. He's generating it. Superman's jaw tightened slightly. Which means we have no baseline for containment. We have no way to reliably suppress him if he becomes a threat. Correct, Batman said from his position at the control console, running continuous scans and updating threat assessments. The Dark Knight's mind was already moving through contingency scenarios, calculating probabilities, assigning resources. Standard magical wards won't work. Zatanna's power is considerable, but it's fundamentally different in nature. The chamber itself is useless if he decides to leave. Then why is he allowing this? Flash asked, materializing beside them in that way speedsters had of making sudden appearances seem completely natural. If he's this powerful, if these containment measures are meaningless, why cooperate? Because of Rin, Superman said, his enhanced hearing tracking the child's heartbeat from 2 levels below, where she was being shown to the quarters they'd prepared for her. The girl had woken briefly during their ascent to the magical chamber, her small hand gripping Sesshomaru's white sleeve with desperate certainty, before the demon lord had assured her in a voice that brooked no argument that she would be safe. The child had trusted him absolutely. In the chamber, Satana completed her circuit, her expression shifting from scientific fascination to something approaching existential confusion. "Your energy signature," she said, approaching Sesshomaru slowly, her hand still raised in non-threatening gesture. "It's not just powerful. It's old. Genuinely ancient. I'm detecting magical resonance patterns that predate recorded Western civilization. Your world, it exists in a different metaphysical framework entirely, doesn't it?" "My world exists in what your science calls a dimensional pocket universe," Sesshomaru replied, standing perfectly still as Satana's magical sight washed over him. "One where the rules of your physics do not fully apply. Where demon and human magic evolved separately from the external forces your practitioners channel. Where power is not borrowed or stolen but inherent to one's nature. And you can navigate between dimensions?" Wonder Woman called down through the intercom. "I did not navigate this one," Sesshomaru replied, his pale eyes moving to the observation window where he could sense, though not see, the heroes watching him. "It opened. We fell through. The mechanism was not of my creation." Batman leaned forward, his detective's mind already assembling pieces of a puzzle that was becoming increasingly complex. "You said in your world, a creature was attacking Rin. That creature was trying to exploit the breach. What kind of creature? What did it want?" There was a pause, barely perceptible, but Batman caught it. In that fraction of a second, Sesshomaru's carefully neutral expression flickered with something that might have been concern, or calculation, or both. "A lesser demon," he said finally. "One seeking power. It sensed the dimensional instability and attempted to harness it. Such creatures are parasitic, they consume opportunities, feeding on chaos and destruction. It attacked because Rin was vulnerable, and weakness attracts predators." "Did you kill it?" Flash asked, his perpetual curiosity overriding his caution. "I destroyed it," Sesshomaru replied with such finality that the distinction between killing and destroying became obvious. The demon lord hadn't simply ended the creature's life, he had obliterated its very existence. "Then the breach collapsed, and we fell through." Superman's expression darkened slightly. "So there's no way back?" "Not immediately. The breach was catastrophic in nature," Sesshomaru said. "In my experience, such ruptures do not naturally repair themselves. Nor do they open twice to the same destination. Your dimensional engineers would need to construct a bridge themselves, assuming they possess the theoretical knowledge." In the observation room, Batman and Superman exchanged a look that communicated volumes without words. This situation had just become exponentially more complicated. Not only did they have a being of unknown power and unclear intentions in their station, but they were potentially looking at a permanent addition to Earth's superhero landscape, or a problem that might never be solved. "We need to call in everyone," Superman said, his tone final. "Green Lantern, Aquaman, the rest. We need the full league briefed on this." As if summoned by his words, the communication array burst to life. Green Lantern's voice came through, crackling with the energy signature of his power ring as he approached the Watchtower from orbit. "Incoming. Superman, we're detecting some seriously weird energy signatures up there. Talk to me." "We have a situation," Superman began, and launched into an explanation that would consume the next hour of urgent briefings, threat assessments, and increasingly frustrated questioning from the League's ranks. Sesshomaru, meanwhile, simply stood in the chamber and waited. His patience was infinite, a product of centuries spent in a world that operated at a different temporal scale than Earth's bustling, hurried existence. He could wait forever if necessary. His concern was only that Rin remained safe, and he could sense her through the Watchtower's walls, her small heart beating with the regularity of a child finally at rest, believing herself protected. That was enough. But in the depths of LexCorp's Manhattan headquarters, something far more dangerous was occurring. Lex Luthor stood before a wall of monitors, watching the Watchtower's operations through 17 different surveillance feeds, some placed by his own operatives, others simply stolen from government satellites with LexCorp's considerable resources. The CEO of LexCorp had spent his entire life studying power. He had built his corporation on the principle that knowledge of power structures was itself the ultimate power. And what he was seeing on those monitors was something that made his brilliant mind race with possibilities. An entity that defied magical categorization. An energy signature that exceeded every metahuman classification system. A being that Superman himself seemed cautious about. A variable that, properly understood and properly utilized, could fundamentally alter the balance of power on Earth. Lex smiled, and it was the expression of a man who had just identified the object of his desire. "Get me everything," he said to his assembled team. Everything on dimensional breaches, on Yukai, on feudal Japan's supernatural history. And find out what this creature wants. Because if Superman is going to try to protect it, then I'm going to take it before he can. In the magical containment chamber, Sesshomaru remained still, his ancient senses extending through the Watchtower's walls, through the city beyond, through the very fabric of this new world. He sensed the attention, the calculation, the hunger for power that radiated from multiple sources. Humanity, he reflected, was remarkably predictable. Regardless of the world or the age, power always attracted those who wanted to control it. And those people always learned, eventually, that some things could not be controlled. They could only be respected. Or destroyed. The Justice League convened in their primary briefing chamber, a circular room suspended at the Watchtower's apex, where the curvature of Earth dominated every viewport and the weight of planetary responsibility seemed to press down on everyone who entered. Superman sat at the head of the table, his expression grave. Wonder Woman stood to his right, arms crossed, her warrior's assessment already complete. Batman occupied his customary position in the shadows, fingers steepled, constantly analyzing. Green Lantern paced near the windows, his power ring's emerald glow casting strange shadows across his features. Aquaman sat with the patience of a monarch accustomed to waiting, and Hawkgirl occupied a seat with the casual readiness of a warrior who was always prepared for violence. Flash had given up sitting 15 minutes ago and now occupied himself with fidgeting with every available surface. "Let's establish what we know," Superman began, his voice carrying the weight of command. "Sesshomaru is a demon lord from an alternate dimensional pocket universe. He's approximately 500 years old, possibly older. His power levels exceed our standard classification systems. He's here because a dimensional breach opened in his world, and he was defending Rin, a human child under his protection, from a parasitic creature attempting to exploit the rupture." "And he's lying," Batman said flatly, not as accusation but as statement of operational principle. "We're missing information. What he's told us is true as far as it goes, but it's incomplete." "Agreed," Wonder Woman said. "A being of his power and age doesn't simply reveal his entire nature in casual conversation. He's holding back significant details about his capabilities, his world, and his intentions. Can we blame him?" Aquaman asked, his deep voice resonating through the chamber. "You're holding a god-tier entity in a magical cage. From his perspective, he's cooperating with beings who have demonstrated paranoia and military protocols. Why would he trust you with complete honesty?" "Because the alternative is that we assume he's a threat and move to containment or elimination," Batman replied. "Which, given his power levels, we probably cannot accomplish. Which means he's either confident we won't try, or he's confident we'll fail if we do." "The containment chamber is already showing strain," Zatanna's voice came through the comm system from her position in the magical analysis lab 3 levels below. "His presence is generating harmonic resonances with the protective wards. It's not hostile, it's just existing. His natural energy signature is so powerful that it's destabilizing the very mechanisms designed to contain it. If he wanted to leave, the chamber would fail within minutes. He's choosing to stay. Green Lantern stopped his pacing. So we're relying entirely on his voluntary cooperation. If he decides we're a threat to the child, or decides he no longer needs us, we have no containment option. Correct, Batman confirmed. Which is why we need to understand his threat assessment of us. What would make him decide we're dangerous? What would trigger him to stop cooperating? Superman's jaw tightened. Argus. Amanda Waller just sent an official demand for custody. She's giving us until 0600 hours to surrender Sesshomaru, or she's authorizing a military strike on the Watchtower. The room fell silent with the particular quality of silence that followed profound stupidity. She's going to attack the Watchtower? Flash asked, his voice rising in pitch. Does Waller understand that we're currently housing a being that Superman can't fight one-on-one? That your entire contingency against him involves hoping he doesn't feel like destroying us? Waller believes, Batman said, and there was something almost respectful in his tone, that Sesshomaru is a metahuman anomaly that can be contained with sufficient firepower and preparation. She's prepared to be wrong about that assessment. She's not prepared to accept that something exists that she cannot ultimately control. We need to go to the government, Hawkgirl said, her practical military background asserting itself. Brief the Joint Chiefs, the President, whoever it takes to convince Argus to stand down. The last thing we need is a military conflict with our own forces while we're trying to determine what Sesshomaru is. I'll handle it, Superman said, already standing. But I'm taking Wonder Woman with me. We need to present this as a unified front. Sesshomaru needs to be informed, Batman interjected. Before Argus makes a move, before this becomes militarized. We control the narrative better if he knows what's coming. He already knows, came a new voice through the chamber speakers. It was Zatanna, but her tone had shifted to something approaching awe. He sensed the military mobilization. He's been tracking Argus communications through the Watchtower systems. I didn't know he could do that until I caught him accessing our networks 15 minutes ago. In the containment chamber 3 levels below, Sesshomaru stood precisely where they'd left him, but his pale eyes had opened fully, and the casual amusement that had characterized his earlier interactions had been replaced by something far more dangerous. Ancient power radiated from him like heat from a star, and the protective wards that had been barely managing his presence began to scream in protest. The federal government believes it has the authority to seize me, he said, his voice reaching every Justice League member simultaneously through every speaker system in the Watchtower. His tone carried no anger, merely observation. This is incorrect. I am not subject to seizure. I am not subject to interrogation. I am not subject to imprisonment. We're working to prevent that, Superman transmitted back, his voice steady and calm. But we need you to remain where you are. We need to show Argus that you're not a threat that requires military intervention. I am a threat to anyone foolish enough to attempt my capture, Sesshomaru replied with absolute clarity. But I am not a threat to you. Not unless you become obstacles to Rin's safety. That is the only truth that matters. Over the next 2 hours, Superman and Wonder Woman cut through enough political red tape to temporarily stall Argus's military mobilization. A combination of appeals to the President's caution, reminders of the League's past successes with dangerous entities, and a carefully worded argument that premature military action could trigger exactly the kind of catastrophic conflict they were trying to prevent resulted in a 24-hour stand-down from federal forces. But Amanda Waller was not accustomed to standing down. Instead, she changed tactics. The message came through secure channels late in the evening, transmitted directly to Batman's private line, a courtesy extended between 2 operatives who understood that sometimes the shadowed corners of conflict required negotiation outside official channels. Bring him to a neutral location, Waller's voice was ice and steel forged into sound. 1 representative from the League, 1 representative from Task Force X. We talk. We negotiate terms for his integration into Earth's legal and security frameworks. Otherwise, I'm going to federal court and having him declared a potentially hostile extradimensional entity requiring immediate containment under the Defense Authorization Act of 2019. Batman understood the threat immediately. Waller had the legal authority to make that argument stick, and if she did, the courts would likely side with the federal government against the Justice League. Sesshomaru would either accept containment or be declared an enemy combatant. "I'll meet with you," Batman replied. But Sesshomaru doesn't negotiate on anyone's terms but his own. "Then we're going to have a problem," Waller replied, and ended the transmission. Batman presented the situation to Superman and Wonder Woman with characteristic bluntness. Waller's playing a different game. She knows she can't fight Sesshomaru militarily, so she's trying to trap him legally. If the courts declare him a threat, we lose our authority to protect him. "We could challenge the ruling," Wonder Woman suggested. "Take it to the Supreme Court if necessary." "Which takes time," Batman said. "Time Waller knows we don't have. Because once the legal framework is in place for his detention, she'll move forward with military action and claim she's simply enforcing a court order." Superman's expression hardened. "So we negotiate. Sesshomaru needs a legal status, some framework where he can remain on Earth without being declared a threat." "He'll never accept that," Batman replied. "Sesshomaru doesn't believe in authority structures. He believes in power and honor. Creating a legal framework requires him to acknowledge that other forces have the authority to govern his actions. Then we make the framework something he can accept," Wonder Woman said, her Amazonian perspective providing clarity. "Not as constraint, but as alliance. A treaty between equals." In the containment chamber, Sesshomaru listened to the transmitted conversation without comment, his ancient mind already calculating the game being played before him. Waller was competent, dangerous in her own way. She understood power structures and manipulation as thoroughly as any general he'd ever faced. But she did not understand beings like him. And that would be her critical mistake. The neutral location Waller selected was a federal facility in rural Virginia, a converted military installation nominally under Joint Chiefs oversight but practically controlled by Argus. The building was reinforced, monitored, and staffed with Task Force X operatives positioned at every access point. It was a show of force designed to remind everyone present that Waller had the capacity to enforce her will through overwhelming preparation. Sesshomaru arrived by choice, not compulsion. Batman had negotiated the terms with absolute clarity. Sesshomaru would meet with Waller, would listen to her proposals, and would accept or reject them based entirely on his own assessment. In exchange, Argus would commit to a 48-hour pause in any legal proceedings or military mobilization. Waller had accepted those terms because she had no alternative. And Sesshomaru had accepted because denying the negotiation would make him appear as though he feared confrontation. An unacceptable position for a being of his power and pride. The Demon Lord sat across from Amanda Waller in a conference room that had been deliberately arranged to minimize the psychological advantage of any single party. The federal director studied him with the analytical precision of someone who had spent decades understanding power in all its forms. Waller had negotiated with warlords, with alien intelligences, with enhanced metahumans whose abilities bordered on godhood. She had survived in an office that required making decisions that would destroy lesser minds through moral calculus alone. But she had never negotiated with something that didn't fear her. "Let's establish baseline principles," Waller began, her voice carrying no inflection, merely data transfer. "You're an extradimensional entity of unknown capabilities. You've arrived on Earth under undefined circumstances. You require legal status to remain here without federal seizure. I'm offering you options that don't involve confinement." "Speak," Sesshomaru replied, his pale eyes fixed on Waller with complete attention. "But understand that I will not accept imprisonment, registration, or restriction of movement. Any proposal that includes such elements will be rejected." "I wouldn't expect you to accept those," Waller said, and there was something almost approaching respect in her tone. You're a sovereign entity. But sovereign entities still require diplomatic status. Currently, you exist in a legal gray area. I'm offering to resolve that ambiguity. Through what mechanism? Sesshomaru asked. Waller leaned forward slightly. Recognition as a foreign dignitary. Your world is a sovereign dimension. You are its representative on Earth. That gives you diplomatic immunity and legal protection. In exchange, you accept certain responsibility. You don't engage in actions that destabilize Earth's geopolitical balance. You cooperate with the Justice League on dimensional anomalies. You accept minimal monitoring to ensure compliance. Monitoring is imprisonment with additional steps, Sesshomaru replied flatly. I will not accept it. Then we're at an impasse, Waller said, and meant it. She was not a woman who made empty threats. If Sesshomaru wouldn't accept her framework, the next step would be to attempt his containment. She would lose, she accepted that mathematically, but the attempt would be made because that was her function. Not impasse, Sesshomaru said, and something shifted in his expression, not warmth, but a recognition of competence. Common ground. I will accept diplomatic status. I will cooperate with the Justice League. I will not engage in actions that destabilize Earth's political structures. But I will not accept monitoring. Instead, I will accept supervision. Waller's eyes narrowed. Explain the distinction. Monitoring is imposed observation, Sesshomaru said. Supervision is oversight by a trusted authority. I will designate Superman and Wonder Woman as my supervisors. If I violate my commitments, they will inform you. If they inform you that I have honored them, you will accept their word without additional verification. It was a masterful negotiating move, and Waller recognized it immediately. By placing Superman and Wonder Woman as intermediaries, Sesshomaru was leveraging their credibility with the federal government while simultaneously removing her direct authority over his actions. He was accepting structure while fundamentally rejecting control. Waller smiled, a genuine expression that cracked her perpetually ice-cold demeanor. You're good at this, she said flatly. Most entities with your power level come in with ultimatums and violence. You understand that accepting some constraints maintains your overall freedom. I have lived 5 centuries, Sesshomaru replied. I have learned that absolute power is a child's fantasy. Real power requires understanding how to operate within systems that constrain it. Your system constrains me minimally. Therefore, I accept it. The agreement was signed within the hour, a document of extraordinary legal complexity that essentially recognized Sesshomaru as a dimensional dignitary under the protection of the Justice League, with no federal authority to detain or monitor him without League authorization. It was a framework that satisfied no one completely, which meant it satisfied everyone adequately. As Sesshomaru prepared to leave the federal facility, Waller extended her hand in a gesture that was part respect, part acknowledgement of a dangerous equal. Sesshomaru looked at her extended hand for a long moment, then took it. His grip was controlled but absolute, enough force to communicate that he could have crushed her bones to dust, but choosing not to. You understand power differently than most humans, he said simply. And you understand authority differently than most entities, Waller replied. That makes us compatible, in a limited sense. Indeed, Sesshomaru said, and released her hand. Back at the Watchtower, Rin learned the outcome of the negotiation from Superman, who presented it to her with the gentleness typically reserved for explaining complex topics to children. The girl's face brightened with the absolute relief of someone who had been terrified of separation and now understood that her greatest fear would not come to pass. So Sesshomaru can stay? She asked, her small voice carrying notes of joy that seemed almost incongruous given her traumatic circumstances. He can stay as long as he chooses, Superman confirmed, and meant it. The diplomatic framework was now in place. Sesshomaru was no longer an anomaly to be contained but an entity under League protection. And I can stay with him. That's his decision, Superman said. But from what I understand, he wouldn't accept a framework that separated him from you. So yes, you can stay with him. Rin smiled, a full, genuine expression of childish joy that seemed to illuminate the observation deck where they stood. It was a reminder to Superman of why the Justice League existed. Not for the grand battles or the cosmic-scale conflicts, but for moments like this. For the ability to protect the innocent and preserve the bonds that gave life meaning. In his quarters within the Watchtower, Sesshomaru received Rin as she ran to him, her small form nearly invisible against his white hakama. He held her gently, his claws careful not to disturb her, his ancient expression softening in a way that few beings on Earth had ever witnessed. "We are safe," he said quietly. "Your fears have no foundation here." "Wasn't scared," Rin replied, "but she was, and they both knew it. I knew you would protect me." "Always," Sesshomaru replied, and in that single word was the absolute commitment of a being for whom promises were not made lightly. This child had changed him, had transformed him from a conqueror into something more complex and more powerful, a being capable of choosing something beyond dominion. But the peace was temporary. In a corporate tower in Gotham City, Lex Luthor watched the negotiations' conclusion through satellite feeds and intercepted communications. His brilliant mind had already processed every element of the agreement and identified the critical flaw. Sesshomaru's power was now legitimized, integrated, and under the protection of the Justice League. Which meant Luthor would need to be far more creative in his approach. He activated a secure line to a contact deep within LexCorp's private research division. "I want a team assembled," he said quietly. "Focus on dimensional physics and Yukai energy signature analysis. And get me everything we have on the Inuyasha universe, geography, magical systems, power structures. If I'm going to acquire Sesshomaru, I need to understand his world first." The game, Lex reflected, was just beginning to become interesting. And he had always been willing to play the longest game if the prize was worth it. 3 weeks into Sesshomaru's tenure at the Watchtower, a pattern had established itself that surprised everyone who observed it. The Demon Lord did not integrate into Justice League operations so much as exist in parallel to them, occupying space in the facility without demanding resources, training with no one, consulting with no one except when directly addressed. He spent his time primarily with Rin, ensuring her comfort, her education, and her gradual acclimation to a world that operated under fundamentally different rules than her own. But he watched. Always, he watched. Batman noticed it first, the way Sesshomaru's pale eyes tracked every Justice League operation, every strategic briefing, every combat engagement transmitted through the Watchtower's systems. It was not the observation of someone planning hostile action. It was the observation of a military commander studying an allied force's tactical doctrine, understanding their strengths and critically, their weaknesses. "He's assessing us," Batman told Superman during a private briefing in the observation deck. "Not as a threat, as a potential ally. He's trying to understand what we're capable of, how we function, what our limitations are." "Is that a problem?" Superman asked, though he already knew the answer. "It's intelligence gathering," Batman replied. "Neutral in itself. But it means he's thinking in terms of military strategy. He's not just visiting Earth. He's considering what role he might play here." Superman nodded slowly, processing the implications. "Have you considered that might not be a bad thing? We could use someone with his experience, his power level. We could use someone with his power level who isn't fundamentally alien to our systems," Batman interrupted. "Superman, we barely understand him. We don't know his actual limitations. We don't know what would make him decide to exercise control instead of just defending Rin. And now he's evaluating whether we're worth allying with long term. Should we be concerned about that evaluation?" Superman asked. "We should be concerned about everything regarding him," Batman replied. "But yes, especially that. What neither Superman nor Batman knew was that Sesshomaru's assessment of the Justice League had already concluded with surprising results. The Demon Lord had determined that while each member possessed considerable power, their true strength lay not in individual capability but in their commitment to collective purpose. They were not warriors bound by honor codes so much as heroes bound by ideology, a far more fragile but potentially far more resilient bond. It was a framework he could work within, provided his commitment to Rin remained compatible with their commitment to their mission. The complication arrived in the form of an energy signature that Zatanna detected while monitoring dimensional fluctuations. It was faint, residual, but unmistakable. Another dimensional breach was forming, approximately 40 kilometers from Gotham City. "This isn't natural," Zatanna reported, her voice tense with professional concern as she transmitted the data to Superman and Batman. "Natural dimensional ruptures don't form this quickly or with this much precision. Someone is deliberately opening a gateway." "To what?" Superman asked immediately. "I don't know," Zatanna replied. "But the signature pattern matches the energy we detected when Sesshomaru arrived. Whatever's coming through, it's from his dimension." Superman moved with characteristic urgency, but it was Batman who reached Sesshomaru first, finding the Demon Lord already standing in the Watchtower's main observation deck, his pale eyes fixed on the distant point where reality was beginning to tear. "You detected it," Batman stated, not as question but as confirmation. "I have sensed it for approximately 7 minutes, Sesshomaru replied without turning to acknowledge Batman's presence. "The breach is deliberate. The signature is aggressive. It is not something that happens naturally. Do you know what's coming through?" Batman pressed. "I have suspicions," Sesshomaru said, and for the first time since arriving on Earth, his voice carried something approaching concern. "In my world, there are creatures of considerable power that exist in the spaces between dimensions. Scavengers. Parasites. Things that feed on ruptures in reality itself. If one has sensed this breach..." He trailed off, but he didn't need to finish. The implications were clear: something dangerous was arriving, and it would be following the same path that Sesshomaru had been forced through. Superman arrived moments later, followed by Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, and Flash. The team assembled with the practiced efficiency of heroes who had responded to emergencies countless times before. But as they received Zatanna's data and Sesshomaru's assessment, the weight of the situation became clear. They were facing an unknown threat from an unknown dimension, with only incomplete information about its nature or capabilities. "We need to establish a perimeter," Wonder Woman said, her warrior's assessment asserting itself. "Evacuate Gotham if necessary. We can't risk civilian casualties if this becomes a combat zone." "The breach location is already moving," Zatanna reported, her eyes glowing with magical sight as she tracked the dimensional rupture's trajectory. "It's not stationary. It's gravitating toward the Watchtower's location." "It's following my signature," Sesshomaru said, and his hand moved to rest on his hakama in a gesture that might have been reassuring if it didn't suggest imminent violence. "Whatever emerges, it emerges because of me." "Then we face it together," Superman said, and it was not suggestion but statement of fact. The Justice League had accepted Sesshomaru into their orbit, had granted him diplomatic status and protection. That protection extended to this crisis. "I will not allow Rin to be endangered," Sesshomaru replied, his pale eyes finally moving from the distant breach to meet Superman's gaze. "If that becomes unavoidable, I will remove her from this location and retreat to defensive positions." "Agreed," Batman said, already coordinating with Watchtower security. "We move Rin to the most secure chambers. Maximum protection. If the situation deteriorates, we execute emergency protocols." The next 6 hours were a masterpiece of preparation and uncertainty. The Justice League positioned themselves at strategic points around Gotham City. Green Lantern created a containment barrier above the breach location. Wonder Woman led a team of secondary League members to establish evacuation protocols for nearby civilians. Superman stood ready for immediate deployment. And Batman coordinated everything from the Watchtower, his brilliant mind calculating probabilities and outcomes. Sesshomaru, meanwhile, descended to the breach location itself, a decision that Batman questioned immediately through the communication network. "You should stay at the Watchtower," Batman transmitted. "Let us handle this." "No," Sesshomaru replied simply. "Whatever emerges, it emerges from my world. It will recognize me. That recognition may provide advantage." He was right, and Batman knew it. An entity from Sesshomaru's dimension would respond to the Demon Lord's presence in ways it might not respond to human or Amazonian warriors. The strategic value of his position outweighed the risk. As sunset painted Gotham's skyline in shades of crimson and gold, the dimensional breach reached critical instability. The fabric of reality tore open, revealing not the chaotic light that had accompanied Sesshomaru's arrival but something far darker. A swirling vortex of shadow and hunger that seemed to pull at everything around it. And through that vortex emerged a creature that defied simple categorization. It was massive, easily 60 meters in length, with a body that seemed to shift between physical and semi-transparent states. Multiple eyes, each one burning with predatory intelligence, fixed themselves on Sesshomaru. Teeth that could have carved through reinforced steel snapped in a gesture that suggested greeting, challenge, or hunger. Or all three. "Sesshomaru," the creature's voice rumbled like an earthquake given language, "the barrier holds you here. You are separated from your world. Separated from your power source. How delicious." Sesshomaru's transformation was immediate and devastating. His form shifted, expanding, revealing the true demon beneath the humanoid shell, a creature of pure power, claws extending to terrible length, eyes blazing with ancient fury. "You dare challenge me in my presence," he snarled, his voice carrying such primal authority that even the Justice League members monitoring from a distance felt compelled to obey. "I dare everything," the parasitic creature replied, and launched itself forward with terrible speed. What followed was not a battle in any conventional sense. It was a collision of forces from a world that operated under completely different rules than Earth's physics allowed. Sesshomaru's whip of light tore through the creature's form, leaving wounds that should have been fatal but instead merely released bursts of shadow and hunger that reformed moments later. Superman moved to intercede, but Batman's voice stopped him immediately. "Hold position. This is his fight. If we interfere, we may disrupt his advantage." And Batman was right. Because what the parasitic creature had not anticipated was that Sesshomaru had adapted to Earth's metaphysical framework. He had spent 3 weeks acclimating to this dimension's magical resonances, its physical laws, its supernatural ley lines. He was no longer operating at 85% capacity. He was operating at 95%. And the creature from his world had made the critical error of assuming his limitations remained constant. The battle lasted 17 minutes. When it concluded, the parasitic creature was destroyed, not merely killed but unmade, scattered into component energies that dispersed across Gotham's sky like dying stars. Sesshomaru stood in the center of the destruction, his demon form gradually shifting back to humanoid state, his white clothing singed but intact, his expression carrying nothing but cold satisfaction. "It will not be the only one," he said, addressing Superman and the gathered Justice League through the communication network. "My world is vast. There are creatures far more dangerous than what you just witnessed. They will sense this breach, this connection to your world. They will come. Then we'll be ready for them," Superman replied. "No," Sesshomaru said simply. "You will not. But I will." And in that statement was the acknowledgement that Sesshomaru's role on Earth was no longer diplomatic. It was functional. He was no longer a guest to be protected. He was a guardian. A force that Earth required. Whether that force remained an ally or became something else entirely would depend on circumstances not yet determined. The aftermath of the creature's destruction forced a fundamental reassessment of Sesshomaru's role within Earth's superhero hierarchy. No longer could he be classified as a diplomatic anomaly requiring protection and oversight. The parasitic entity from his dimension had demonstrated that his presence on Earth was not merely an isolated incident but the opening salvo in a potential invasion from a world humanity was entirely unprepared to face. Batman convened an emergency session of the full Justice League, including secondary members and key allies. The Watchtower's primary briefing chamber filled with the presence of Earth's greatest heroes, all of them grappling with a singular uncomfortable truth: they needed Sesshomaru far more than he needed them. The creature we faced was classified as what in his world? Superman asked Sesshomaru, who stood at the chamber's periphery rather than seated at the table. A deliberate choice that emphasized his independence from the League's hierarchical structure. A scavenger, Sesshomaru replied. Lesser in power compared to true demons of significant age and cultivation. More dangerous than human warriors but significantly weaker than entities like myself. In my world, such creatures are common in the borderlands between dimensions. And you believe more will come, Wonder Woman said, her tone carrying the weight of tactical assessment. I know they will come, Sesshomaru corrected. The breach is a beacon. Creatures of hunger sense weakness in the dimensional barriers. They will investigate. They will attempt exploitation. Some may be minor threats. Others will require significant effort to neutralize. Flash whistled low. So we're looking at a potential ongoing invasion from your world? Not invasion, Sesshomaru said, and there was something almost dismissive in his tone. Incursion. Opportunistic predation. These creatures do not seek conquest. They seek resources. Dimensional tiers are resources. They provide access to new hunting grounds, new sources of sustenance. Left unchecked, multiple breaches could form. Your world could become a feeding ground. The implications settled over the briefing chamber like a shroud. Earth's superhero community had faced invasion threats before: alien armadas, interdimensional tyrants, cosmic entities seeking domination. But those threats had possessed goals beyond simple predation. This was fundamentally different. A cascade of creatures motivated purely by hunger, each one potentially capable of inflicting catastrophic damage. What would you recommend? Batman asked, his detective's mind already processing the strategic implications. Closure of the current breach is first priority, Sesshomaru said. Your sorceress has the capability to seal dimensional ruptures if provided with proper guidance. Second priority is preparation. Your military should be equipped with weapons capable of penetrating supernatural defenses. Third priority is fortification of key population centers. If multiple breaches form simultaneously, your league cannot defend everywhere. So essentially, we need to prepare for a prolonged conflict with an enemy we don't understand, against opponents that could number in the hundreds or thousands, using weapons technology we haven't developed yet, Aquaman summarized, his tone carrying the pragmatic acceptance of a ruler accustomed to impossible odds. Yes, Sesshomaru confirmed. And you will lose the first few engagements. Casualties will occur. Civilian populations will suffer. Your military will demand withdrawal from the most dangerous zones. Your government will question the strategic value of continued resistance. All of this is inevitable. But if we persist? Superman asked, leaning forward slightly. If you persist, you develop understanding of your enemy. You create effective countermeasures. You establish defensive positions that creatures of hunger cannot overcome. Eventually, the cost of incursion becomes too high, and the creatures retreat to seek easier prey elsewhere, Sesshomaru said. This is how wars against dimensional parasites are fought. Not through victory but through making yourself an unattractive target. Over the next 72 hours, the Justice League transformed from a superhero organization focused on immediate crisis response into something resembling a standing military force prepared for sustained conflict. Batman coordinated with government agencies to develop weapons capable of affecting supernatural entities. Wonder Woman worked with military strategists to establish defensive positions across major metropolitan areas. Superman consulted with scientists on understanding the mechanics of dimensional breaches so that Zatanna could develop closure protocols. And Sesshomaru, working with Zatanna in the Watchtower's magical research chamber, began the process of teaching Earth's greatest sorceress how to interact with yokai magic, a fundamentally different system than Western demonology or Eastern mysticism as humans understood it. "Your magic is borrowed," Sesshomaru explained, watching as Zatanna attempted to trace the energy patterns of a yokai artifact he had provided. "You access forces beyond yourself and command them through will and incantation. My magic is intrinsic. It is not commanded. It is expressed. The distinction is critical. So I need to stop trying to control it and start trying to harmonize with it." Zatanna asked, frustration evident in her voice. She was accustomed to being the most knowledgeable practitioner of the magical arts among the Justice League. Sesshomaru's presence was humbling. "Correct," Sesshomaru said. "Your spells attempt to impose order on chaos. Yokai magic seeks to flow with chaos and direct it toward intended purpose. It is the difference between damming a river and surfing a wave." Zatanna took a deep breath, released her preconceptions, and tried again. This time, instead of attempting to command the yokai artifact's energy, she attempted to synchronize with it. The result was imperfect but showed genuine promise. The artifact's glow intensified, responding to her presence rather than resisting it. "There," Sesshomaru said, and there was something approaching approval in his tone. "You begin to understand. With practice, you may develop sufficient comprehension to seal dimensional breaches effectively." Meanwhile, in federal facilities across the United States, weapons designers were working with specifications that Batman had provided, based on Sesshomaru's assessment of what would be required to damage creatures evolved in a world where conventional physics operated differently. Railguns modified to fire rounds infused with blessed silver. Electromagnetic weapons calibrated to disrupt supernatural energy signatures. Biological agents designed to exploit the specific metabolic vulnerabilities of yokai parasites. It was a quiet revolution in Earth's military capabilities, conducted in secret, authorized by the president but kept from public knowledge. The last thing the world needed was panic regarding an interdimensional invasion force. But Lex Luthor knew. Through his network of corporate operatives and informants embedded in government agencies, Luthor received regular briefings on the Justice League's preparations. And each briefing only confirmed his growing certainty: Sesshomaru represented the greatest variable in Earth's geopolitical equation. A being of unparalleled power who was currently working in alliance with the Justice League, but who would inevitably move beyond them as his understanding of Earth's political structures deepened. The question was not whether Luthor would attempt to acquire Sesshomaru, but how. And Luthor had developed a plan. It began with a simple contact, a message delivered through anonymous channels to Sesshomaru, transmitted in perfect classical Japanese, composed with enough cultural nuance to suggest the sender understood Sesshomaru's world with genuine sophistication. The message was brief: a being of your caliber should not be constrained by an alliance with creatures of limited lifespan and inferior power. I propose a meeting to discuss your true potential in Earth's power structure. Sesshomaru received the message while training Rin in meditation technique, teaching the child how to sense the spiritual energy that flowed through all living things. He read it once, then deleted it without response. But he did not dismiss it. Because Luthor was right. The Justice League was, from his perspective, a collection of beings with perhaps 30 to 80 years of useful existence remaining. Superman might live longer, but even Kryptonian lifespans had theoretical limits. Wonder Woman had extended existence, but still finite compared to his own centuries. He was being asked to consider his long-term interests in an alliance with beings who would eventually die. It was, he had to admit, a compelling argument. But it was also precisely the kind of appeal that had no bearing on his decision. He had committed to protecting Rin. Rin existed on Earth. Therefore, Earth's security was inseparable from Rin's security. Which meant allying with the Justice League was not a short-term tactical choice but a long-term strategic necessity. Unless, of course, he could somehow find a way to close the dimensional breaches permanently and return to his world with Rin safely established in a sanctuary beyond the reach of parasitic incursion. A thought occurred to him then, dangerous in its simplicity, terrifying in its implications. What if he didn't need to wait for the dimensional breaches to become a sustained crisis? What if he could force closure by flooding the gaps between dimensions with so much demonic energy that nothing could pass through? It would require a level of power expenditure that would leave him dramatically weakened for an extended period. But it would be permanent. He shared this possibility with Superman during a private conversation in the Watchtower's observation deck, watching Earth rotate below them like a blue marble suspended in infinite darkness. If I were to execute full-dimensional closure, Sesshomaru said, the process would require approximately 48 hours of continuous power output. During that time, I would be functionally vulnerable. I would need protection from any entity that recognized my weakness. You're asking us to guard you, Superman said, understanding immediately. I am informing you of a possibility, Sesshomaru replied. Whether you choose to facilitate it is secondary to my own decision. But it would be practical if you agreed to provide defense during the closure process. Superman nodded slowly. We'll protect you. Whatever resources we need to allocate, we'll do it. That's what allies do. Sesshomaru was silent for a long moment, his ancient eyes reflecting Earth's light like a mirror of infinite depth. Then it appears, he said finally, that I have come to value this alliance more than I expected. And in the shadows of LexCorp's research divisions, operatives continued their work, analyzing Yukai energy signatures, studying dimensional mechanics, calculating the precise moment when Sesshomaru's commitment to dimensional closure would render him vulnerable to acquisition. Luthor was a patient man. And he had already decided that whatever resources were required to acquire a being of Sesshomaru's power, they would be justified by the outcome. The game, it seemed, was accelerating toward its critical juncture. The preparation for dimensional closure occupied every resource the Justice League could dedicate without compromising their other operations. Batman established a secure perimeter around the Watchtower, the location Sesshomaru had identified as optimal for the closure ritual, given its position in geosynchronous orbit and its distance from densely populated civilian centers. Green Lantern reinforced the station's structural integrity with his power ring, creating a protective barrier that could withstand sustained assault. Wonder Woman coordinated with Aquaman to establish secondary defensive positions across the Atlantic and Pacific, prepared to respond to any dimensional ruptures that might form during the closure process. Superman took personal responsibility for Sesshomaru's immediate protection, a choice that Batman questioned precisely once before accepting its strategic necessity. He's stronger than you are, Batman said flatly, his voice filtered through the encrypted communication channel that connected the Watchtower's command center to Superman's position. If something goes wrong during the closure, if he becomes unstable or hostile, you won't be able to restrain him. Then I won't try to restrain him, Superman replied. I'll try to survive. And more importantly, I'll ensure that nothing external succeeds in exploiting his vulnerability. It was an answer that satisfied Batman's operational requirements if not his desire for absolute contingency. The Dark Knight accepted it, filed away his concerns for future reference, and returned his attention to the greater strategic picture. What neither Superman nor Batman anticipated was that Lex Luthor would move during the closure process itself. The attack came at hour 14 of the 48-hour ritual, precisely when Sesshomaru's power output had reached maximum intensity and his attention was entirely devoted to the dimensional ceiling. LexCorp. Operatives, transported by military-grade aircraft and coordinated through channels that had been carefully hidden from Argus surveillance, launched a coordinated assault on the Watchtower. The first warning came from Green Lantern's power ring, detecting energy signatures that matched no known military technology. Superman responded immediately, but he was already moving toward the nearest dimensional rupture where Sesshomaru's ritual was reaching critical intensity. The delay was enough. The assault was surgical in its precision. 12 specially equipped operatives, each one wearing armor designed specifically to counter superhero capabilities, breached the Watchtower's external defenses. They were not attempting to occupy the station or destroy it. Their singular objective was to reach Sesshomaru before Superman could intercept them. Batman detected the breach 90 seconds after it occurred. "We have LexCorp operatives in the station," he transmitted, his voice carrying the particular calm that preceded extreme tactical complications. "They're moving toward Sesshomaru's position. Superman, you're the closest. Can you intercept?" "Negative," Superman replied, his voice tight with frustration. "I'm 40 seconds away minimum. Closest League members are Flash and Green Lantern." "I'm moving," Flash transmitted, his position already shifting to super-speed trajectory toward the operative's likely path. But LexCorp had prepared for Flash. The moment the speedster appeared in their designated corridor, specialized EMP devices activated, flooding the space with electromagnetic energy calibrated to disrupt the speed-force connection. Flash stumbled, his superhuman reflexes barely preventing a catastrophic collision with the corridor's reinforced walls. Green Lantern's power ring detected the breach simultaneously, but by the time he attempted to create a containment barrier between the operatives and Sesshomaru's location, they had already penetrated 3 levels. Deeper into the station. What they discovered when they reached the dimensional closure site was something that none of them had anticipated: Sesshomaru was not alone. Zatanna stood beside the Demon Lord, her hands glowing with magical energy as she assisted in the final stages of the closure ritual. The sorceress detected the operative's approach and immediately shifted her focus, creating a barrier of pure magical force that would have disintegrated any standard weapon. The lead operative, a woman whose armor bore the distinctive markings of LexCorp's elite tactical division, did not hesitate. She activated a device that Luthor had spent months developing, a containment field specifically calibrated to suppress Yukai energy signature and forcibly interrupt magical casting. The device was crude, imperfect, and would likely function for only seconds before overloading. But seconds were all that was required. Sesshomaru's eyes snapped open as the containment field activated, disrupting his connection to the dimensional sealing ritual. For a fractional instant, his power output destabilized, and the dimensional closure wavered dangerously. Zatanna screamed something that might have been a spell or might have been a curse, attempting to compensate for the sudden loss of Sesshomaru's stabilizing influence. The device deactivated exactly 3 seconds after activation, overloaded by the sheer magnitude of the power it was attempting to suppress. But those 3 seconds were catastrophic. The dimensional closure sequence degraded, and 7 separate ruptures began to form across Earth's atmosphere instead of the carefully controlled single breach they had been managing. Superman arrived in the closure chamber to find chaos. Sesshomaru was advancing on the operatives with the terrible grace of a predator, his claws extended fully, his eyes blazing with fury. Zatanna was attempting to salvage the closure ritual while simultaneously creating barriers between Sesshomaru and the operatives. And the operatives themselves were retreating, their containment field having failed, their mission having catastrophically succeeded in destabilizing the sealing process without actually capturing Sesshomaru. Enough. Superman's voice carried a command authority that stopped even Sesshomaru's advance momentarily. LexCorp operatives, stand down. Sesshomaru, the ritual is damaged but not destroyed. We can repair it if you allow Zatanna to focus. The operatives did not stand down. Instead, they activated a secondary failsafe, explosive charges placed throughout the Watchtower's critical systems, designed to force evacuation and create chaos sufficient for their escape. Superman detected the detonation sequence immediately and moved to prevent catastrophic damage, leaving Sesshomaru and the operatives in proximity without direct supervision. The Demon Lord did not hesitate. His transformation was instantaneous and total. From humanoid to his true demon form, a creature of impossible beauty and terrible violence. The lead operative's armor disintegrated under his claws, and she was thrown backward with force sufficient to rupture multiple internal organs. But she survived. Because Sesshomaru, operating under some constraint that his fury could not entirely override, had chosen not to kill her. He had chosen merely to incapacitate. The operatives retreated in the face of such terrible power, evacuating through emergency protocols as Superman extinguished their explosive charges and prevented station-wide catastrophic damage. When the chaos had settled, Sesshomaru stood in the center of the closure chamber, his demon form gradually shifting back to humanoid state, his expression carrying something that might have been cold anger or might have been disappointment. "Lex Luthor," he said simply, his voice carrying absolute certainty. "Yes," Batman confirmed through the communication channel. LexCorp operatives, equipped with technology designed specifically to disrupt Yukai energy signatures. "Luthor is making a move." "Then I will respond appropriately," Sesshomaru replied. But Superman stepped between the Demon Lord and the nearest exit. "Let us handle Luthor. You need to complete the dimensional closure. That's the priority." Sesshomaru regarded Superman with those ancient, fathomless eyes, and for a moment, the question hung in the air, would the Demon Lord's need for retribution override his commitment to the Alliance? "The closure ritual cannot be completed in the next 36 hours, Zatanna interjected, her voice carrying professional clarity despite her near exhaustion. "The destabilization requires a complete recalibration. I need time. Sesshomaru needs recovery. And yes, we need to address the fact that Lex Luthor just tried to kidnap one of our primary assets." "Then we address all three simultaneously," Batman said, his strategic mind already calculating how to accomplish the impossible. "Zatanna, how much time do you need?" 72 hours minimum, the sorceress replied. "The ritual is complex. It cannot be rushed without risking permanent dimensional instability." "Then we buy you 72 hours, Superman said. "Sesshomaru, I'm taking Rin to the most secure location we have, a secondary facility that only I know the location of. Batman will coordinate our defenses against any further LexCorp incursion. Wonder Woman will lead a team to confront Luthor directly. We make it clear that acquiring you is not an option." Sesshomaru's expression shifted to something approaching respect. "Your strategic assessment is sound. However, Rin remains with me. I will not allow separation, regardless of security protocols." Superman started to protest, then recognized the immovable nature of the statement. "Then we secure a location for both of you. Somewhere protected that Luthor can't access." "I know such a location," Wonder Woman said, entering the closure chamber with that characteristic confidence that came from being the daughter of Amazonian warrior culture. "Themyscira. The hidden island sanctuary of the Amazons. If Lex Luthor can penetrate Themyscira's defenses, he's already won, and additional protocols won't matter." It was an extraordinary offer, to bring an outsider, a demon from another world, to the sacred homeland of the Amazons. It suggested that Wonder Woman had reached conclusions about Sesshomaru's character that went beyond tactical assessment. Sesshomaru inclined his head slightly. "I accept. But understand, if Rin is threatened, my response will be absolute and will not be constrained by diplomatic considerations." "Understood," Wonder Woman replied. "Then let's move before Luthor tries again." The evacuation took less than 30 minutes. Sesshomaru, Rin, and Wonder Woman departed the Watchtower via a teleportation portal that the Amazon Princess had established through magical channels unknown to the broader Justice League. The moment they were clear, Batman activated enhanced security protocols and Batman moved forward with his portion of the plan. Developing contingencies against potential Luthor operations while simultaneously preparing defenses for the 7 new dimensional ruptures that were already beginning to show signs of stabilization. What no one anticipated was that Lex Luthor had already begun a secondary operation, one that would render all of Batman's careful contingencies and strategic preparations functionally irrelevant. In a research facility beneath Gotham City, Luthor's scientists were examining the data they had collected during the brief moments when the containment field had disrupted Sesshomaru's energy signature. The data was incomplete, but it was sufficient. They had a map of Yukai energy patterns. They had a baseline understanding of dimensional mechanics. And more importantly, they had proof that Sesshomaru could be disrupted, interrupted, and temporarily incapacitated. Lex Luthor smiled from his observation platform, watching his teams compile data and formulate new approaches. The failure today was not actually a failure. It was reconnaissance. It was information gathering. It was the foundation for a second, more comprehensive attempt. How long until we can construct a reliable containment mechanism? He asked his lead scientist. 6 weeks, minimum, the scientist replied. The energy patterns are complex. We need. You have 3 weeks, Luthor interrupted. Allocate all necessary resources. I want a containment field that can hold Yukai energy for a minimum of 8 hours. By then, I will have positioned transportation and secured destination coordinates. And if Sesshomaru resists capture, the scientist asked carefully. Then we kill him, Luthor replied with absolute flatness. A dead Sesshomaru is more valuable to me than a free one. I can study the corpse. I can replicate his genetic material. I can understand his power source through analysis. Alive, he remains an uncontrolled variable. Dead, he becomes a solved problem. It was typical Luthor logic, the perspective of a man for whom every problem could be reduced to a question of sufficient resource allocation and sufficient willingness to accept collateral damage. And it was precisely the kind of threat that would push Sesshomaru beyond the boundaries of diplomatic cooperation. Themyscira existed in a dimensional pocket adjacent to the primary reality, a hidden sanctuary protected by magic so ancient that even Zatanna had spent years studying its foundational principles without achieving complete understanding. The island was beautiful in a way that transcended physical aesthetics. It was beautiful the way power was beautiful, terrible and perfect and absolutely certain of its own necessity. Rin's first glimpse of the Amazonian homeland came as they materialized in the sacred plaza at Themyscira's heart, surrounded by warrior women whose armor glinted with the weight of millennia of combat experience. The child's eyes widened with wonder at the impossible architecture, the cascading waterfalls that defied gravitational logic, the gardens where plants seemed to grow in defiance of seasonal limitation. Queen Hippolyta herself came to greet them, her expression carrying the particular wisdom of a ruler who had seen empires rise and fall while her own kingdom remained eternal. She studied Sesshomaru with the kind of assessment that suggested she was measuring not just his power but his character, his capability for honor, his fundamental nature. You are welcome in Themyscira, Hippolyta said formally, provided you understand that this sanctuary is protected by magic older than your world's recorded history. Violence committed here will be answered by forces that even you may find challenging. Sesshomaru inclined his head with the respect due to an equal. I do not come seeking conflict. I come to protect the child. My presence here will not disrupt your sanctuary. See that it does not, Hippolyta replied, but there was something almost approaching warmth in her tone. She had lived long enough to recognize when a being's stated commitments aligned with their fundamental nature. Sesshomaru was telling the truth. Over the next 72 hours, while Zatanna worked on recalibrating the dimensional closure ritual and Batman coordinated defensive operations against potential Luthor incursions, Sesshomaru and Rin found themselves existing in an unexpected sanctuary. The Amazons, despite their warrior culture, possessed considerable patience with children. Rin was welcomed into their community with the kind of acceptance that suggested they recognized something in her. Perhaps the resilience of someone who had survived circumstances that should have destroyed them, or perhaps simply the acknowledgement that innocence was worth protecting, even across dimensional boundaries. But Sesshomaru did not allow himself to relax entirely. His ancient senses remained extended, monitoring every fluctuation in the dimensional barriers, every potential threat to Themyscira's security, every indication that Lex Luthor was preparing a secondary assault. Wonder Woman found him in the observation gardens late on the second day, standing motionless as moonlight painted the Amazonian landscape in shades of silver and shadow. "Rin is sleeping," Wonder Woman said, her warrior's approach making no attempt at stealth. "She seems happy. More at peace than I suspect she's been since arriving on Earth." "She trusts Themyscira," Sesshomaru replied without turning to acknowledge the Amazon princess's presence. "She senses that this place is not fundamentally different from her own world. That magic and warrior culture coexist without the need for science to rationalize or constrain them. Is that why you seem more at ease here?" Wonder Woman asked, moving to stand beside him, her Amazonian eyes seeing the same landscape with the familiarity of someone who had grown up beneath these skies. "Because this world operates according to principles that make intuitive sense to you?" "I am not at ease," Sesshomaru replied. "I am merely less concerned about immediate threats. Themyscira's defenses are formidable. Lex Luthor lacks the resources to penetrate them. That is sufficient." Wonder Woman nodded slowly, understanding that this was as close to peace as a being like Sesshomaru was capable of experiencing. "You know what Luthor is planning, don't you? You've sensed it through whatever connection you maintain with Earth's dimensional fabric." It was not a question, and Sesshomaru did not treat it as one. "Luthor constructs a containment mechanism calibrated to suppress Yukai energy. He believes that sufficient resource allocation and sufficient technological innovation can overcome my capabilities. He is incorrect, but he is not entirely wrong to attempt the effort." "Can he actually create something that would hold you?" Wonder Woman asked, her strategic assessment immediately activating. "For a limited duration," Sesshomaru confirmed. "Perhaps 6 to 8 hours if his engineers prove more competent than I anticipate. But durability is not the critical factor. The critical factor is intent. Luthor does not seek alliance. He seeks acquisition. That distinction changes everything." "Meaning?" "Meaning I will not allow myself to be contained," Sesshomaru said, his pale eyes finally moving from the landscape to meet Wonder Woman's gaze. "If Luthor succeeds in deploying his containment mechanism, I will destroy him and everything he has constructed rather than submit to imprisonment. That response will be disproportionate and destructive and will cost innocent lives." Wonder Woman absorbed this statement without visible reaction, processing the implications with the tactical clarity of a warrior who had been born into conflict. "So we need to prevent Luthor from ever reaching the deployment stage. Neutralize him before he can threaten you." "Yes," Sesshomaru confirmed. "Batman's already working on that," Wonder Woman said. "He's been coordinating with Superman and Green Lantern to track LexCorp's operations. But Luthor's good at hiding his true objectives behind layers of corporate misdirection. By the time we locate his real research facility, he could be months away from successful containment deployment." "Then we accelerate the timeline," Sesshomaru replied, and something dangerous flickered across his expression, the momentary appearance of a being considering options that existed outside conventional moral framework. "I will draw him out. I will force him to deploy his containment mechanism before it is perfected. And when it fails, as it will, I will ensure that Lex Luthor understands precisely why challenging beings of my power tier is a fundamentally poor strategic decision. That could start a war between you and LexCorp," Wonder Woman warned. "Luthor has resources that—" "I do not fear Luthor's resources," Sesshomaru interrupted. "I fear only the consequences of allowing him to continue operating as a threat to this world and to Rin's safety. Those are distinct concerns." Over the next 18 hours, Superman received a message through secure channels that Batman confirmed came from Sesshomaru, a simple statement of intent to leave Themyscira and return to Earth to force confrontation with Lex Luthor. Wonder Woman attempted to dissuade him, explaining that Themyscira's protection was temporary shelter, not a permanent solution. Sesshomaru acknowledged this with the serene acceptance of someone who had already accepted that confrontation was inevitable. The dimensional closure requires Zatanna's complete focus, Superman transmitted to Batman. If Sesshomaru leaves Themyscira, Luthor will know immediately. He'll accelerate his timeline and attempt deployment before the closure is completed. Then we move first, Batman replied, his voice carrying the particular certainty that preceded operations that had been planned with meticulous precision. I've located Luthor's primary research facility. A converted Wayne Enterprises property in the Appalachian Mountains that was purchased through Shell Corporations 3 years ago. Superman, Green Lantern, and I assault the facility simultaneously. We destroy the containment mechanism before Luthor can deploy it. Then Sesshomaru returns to complete the dimensional closure without threat of interruption. Luthor will see it coming, Superman warned. Of course he will, Batman replied. Luthor's brilliant enough to anticipate most strategic moves. But he's also arrogant enough to believe his contingencies will protect him. That arrogance is the weakness we're going to exploit. The assault on Luthor's Appalachian facility occurred at 0300 hours, coordinated with precision that only the Justice League could manage. Batman infiltrated the facility's security systems and disabled the automated defenses. Green Lantern created a containment sphere around the research laboratories to prevent escape. Superman simply walked through the reinforced walls, his invulnerability rendering Luthor's security protocols irrelevant. What they found was both more and less than they anticipated. The containment mechanism was further along than Batman's intelligence had suggested, fully functional, tested, and operational. But Lex Luthor himself was not present. He had anticipated the attack, had implemented contingencies, and had already relocated to an alternate facility with the core components of his research. He knew we were coming, Green Lantern said, his power ring analyzing the abandoned laboratory. He left this as a distraction while he moved to secondary location. Of course, Batman replied, and there was something almost like respect in his tone. Luthor's not interested in direct confrontation with the Justice League. He's interested in acquiring Sesshomaru. These containment mechanisms are just resources. He has more. So we failed, Superman said flatly. We delayed, Batman corrected. Luthor has to completely rebuild his research facility, recalibrate his containment mechanisms, and relocate his primary operational base. That takes time. Time Zatanna needs to complete. The dimensional closure. Which means we buy her 48 more hours of operational security. But what Batman did not fully anticipate was how Lex Luthor would respond to the destruction of his research facility and the displacement of his operations. The CEO of LexCorp had long ago learned that direct competition with the Justice League was strategically unfavorable. So instead, he changed the game entirely. A message was released to the international media, transmitted simultaneously across every news network on Earth. Lex Luthor, speaking from an undisclosed location, made a simple statement: Sesshomaru was a dimensional entity of unknown power and potentially hostile intent. The Justice League was harboring him, protecting him from legitimate government oversight. Luthor was releasing complete technical data on Yukai energy signatures, dimensional mechanics, and theoretical frameworks for containment systems. He was not attempting to contain Sesshomaru anymore. He was making Sesshomaru a problem for all of humanity. Within 6 hours, 17 nations had activated military research programs focused on Yukai containment and suppression. The international community, terrified by the possibility of invasion from an unknown dimension, began developing weapons and containment strategies. The Justice League, which had been operating in relative secrecy, suddenly found itself defending Sesshomaru against global military pressure. It's brilliant, Batman admitted to Superman, his voice carrying the respect of a master strategist acknowledging a dangerous opponent's gambit. Luthor eliminated himself as a threat by making Sesshomaru everyone's threat. Now we're not fighting LexCorp. We're fighting the entire military apparatus of the global community. Can we hold them off? Superman asked, though he already knew the answer. For 48 hours, Batman replied. After that, when Zatanna completes the dimensional closure and the breach threat is eliminated, the international pressure will dissipate. Until then, Sesshomaru needs to remain hidden and protected. Sesshomaru, monitoring the news broadcasts from Themyscira, made his decision with the cold clarity that characterized all his choices. He transmitted a message to Superman, a single sentence that communicated everything. I will resolve this. Give Zatanna the time she needs. And with that, he prepared to transform the problem from a hidden crisis into a public demonstration of power and consequence that would remind humanity why some beings were treated with respect rather than challenged to acquisition contests. The final confrontation was approaching, and everyone involved understood that when it occurred, the very nature of Earth's relationship with the supernatural would fundamentally change. Sesshomaru's emergence from Themyscira was deliberate and public. He did not attempt concealment or strategic positioning. Instead, he materialized in the center of the United Nations Plaza in New York City, his demon form fully manifested, his power radiating outward in waves that every sensor on Earth immediately detected. News helicopters captured the moment. Social media exploded with footage. Within minutes, the image of a silver-haired demon standing in the heart of humanity's greatest diplomatic gathering was transmitted to every corner of the globe. Superman arrived within seconds, materializing beside Sesshomaru with the readiness of a hero prepared for conflict. But the demon lord raised a single clawed hand in a gesture that communicated absolute certainty: do not interfere. I am Sesshomaru. His voice echoed across the plaza and was simultaneously broadcast to billions of humans watching through electronic media. I come from a world adjacent to yours. I arrived by accident. I remain by choice. And I will address the fears that your governments have manufactured regarding my presence. The UN Security Council, witnessing this broadcast from their chambers, immediately activated emergency protocols. Military units mobilized. Fighter jets launched. Naval vessels changed course toward New York. The global response to what was perceived as a hostile dimensional entity invasion was instantaneous and overwhelming. But Sesshomaru remained perfectly still, his ancient eyes fixed on the cameras transmitting his image to the world. Your governments fear what they do not understand, he continued. They fear my power. They fear that I might seek dominion over your world. They fear that my presence represents a threat to human sovereignty and security. These fears are not entirely irrational. They are, however, based on incomplete assessment. He extended one clawed hand, and without touching anything physical, he manipulated the very fabric of dimensional space. Visible to human perception. The cameras captured the sight of a rift opening, one of the parasitic incursions from his world. The creature that emerged was magnificent in its terrible hunger, a being that dwarfed even Sesshomaru's demon form, radiating predatory power that no human weapon could effectively counter. And then, in a display of force that lasted exactly 7 seconds, Sesshomaru destroyed it. The creature was unmade, scattered into component energies that dissipated across the New York skyline. The message was unmistakable: this was what threatened Earth. This was the danger that the international community should be focusing on, not on the being who had spent 3 weeks defending human civilians against incursion from his own world. I have closed the dimensional breach that brought me here, Sesshomaru said, and his words carried the weight of absolute truth. The process requires 42 hours from this moment. During that time, parasitic entities from my world may attempt to exploit the closing rupture. I will neutralize them. You will not. Your weapons are inadequate. Your strategies are ineffective. Your attempts to contain me will be disruptive and counterproductive. Military aircraft were now visible on the horizon, approaching the UN Plaza at maximum velocity. Sesshomaru paid them no attention. I offer you a choice, he continued. Permit the dimensional closure to complete unimpeded, and I will depart your world. Your dimensional barriers will be permanently sealed. No further incursions will occur. Or attempt to restrain me, and I will be forced to defend myself. That defense will be disproportionate and will result in significant loss of life. Choose wisely. The first missile fired from one of the approaching fighter jets, a kinetic round calibrated specifically for supernatural entity disruption, based on the technical specifications Luther had released to the international community. It struck Sesshomaru directly, and the impact generated a blast radius that shattered windows across 6 city blocks. When the dust cleared, Sesshomaru stood without visible injury, his demon form unmarked by the weapon strike. He looked at the approaching military aircraft with something approaching disappointment. "You have chosen poorly," he said simply. What followed was not a battle in any conventional sense. It was a demonstration of power so absolute that military strategists would spend decades attempting to understand how one entity had neutralized an entire international military response. Sesshomaru did not kill the pilots, he simply disabled their aircraft, stranding them safely on the ground or in the air with minimal injury. He did not destroy the weapons. He rendered them functionally inert, their advanced systems disrupted by a wave of demonic energy that bypassed their protective mechanisms. Within minutes, military forces across the globe were reporting catastrophic systems failures. Weapons became useless. Communications networks degraded. Defensive systems powered down. It was not an attack so much as a statement. Technology as a method of controlling power was irrelevant when facing something that existed outside technology's framework. Superman maintained position beside Sesshomaru throughout, monitoring for any escalation that would require his intervention. But it never came. The Demon Lord's response was precise, devastating, and absolutely calibrated to accomplish his objective without crossing into actual violence against human combatants. When it was finished, when every military unit attempting to apprehend Sesshomaru had been neutralized and rendered non-threatening, the Demon Lord turned to address the cameras one final time. "I have demonstrated why your military strategy is inadequate," he said with absolute clarity. "I have not done this to suggest conquest or dominion. I have done this to ensure that your governments understand a fundamental truth: some beings cannot be controlled through force. They can only be negotiated with, respected, or avoided. Your Justice League has chosen respect. Your governments would be wise to honor that choice." The broadcast ended there, but its effects would resonate for decades. The moment was replayed endlessly through global media. Military strategists debated the implications. Governments reassessed their relationships with the Justice League. And most importantly, the international community began to understand that certain threats could not be resolved through conventional means. Batman, monitoring the situation from the Watchtower, transmitted a single message to Superman: masterful. He just made himself more valuable to us than we could ever be to him. Now they'll accept his presence because they're afraid of what happens if they don't. Over the next 40 hours, Zatanna completed the dimensional closure ritual while Sesshomaru maintained position in New York City, his presence ensuring that no military force dared attempt further intervention. Additional dimensional ruptures formed, as Sesshomaru had predicted, but he eliminated each one with the methodical precision of a being performing a task well within his capabilities. Rin watched the broadcasts from Themyscira, her small face carrying pride and concern in equal measure. Wonder Woman stood beside her, understanding without explanation the complex emotions that the child was experiencing: pride in Sesshomaru's strength, concern that his vulnerability during the closure ritual might be exploited. "He will be safe," Wonder Woman assured her, placing a hand on Rin's shoulder. "The Justice League will protect him. That is what allies do." At hour 38 of the closure process, a final dimensional rupture formed. Larger than all the others, containing a creature that even Sesshomaru's ancient senses identified as significantly more dangerous than standard parasitic incursions. It was a territorial entity, something that guarded the borders between dimensions, something that had never before been forced to confront a creature of Sesshomaru's power on an adjacent dimensional plane. Superman sensed the shift in Sesshomaru's demeanor immediately. The Demon Lord's power output increased by at least 30%, and his expression shifted from controlled certainty to something approaching genuine combat readiness. "This one is different," Superman transmitted to Batman. "Sesshomaru's actually concerned. Can he handle it?" Batman asked, his tactical mind already processing worst-case scenarios. "I believe so," Superman replied. "But it's going to require him to fight while maintaining the dimensional closure ritual. That's going to be complicated." What ensued was perhaps the most spectacular demonstration of Sesshomaru's capabilities that Earth had ever witnessed. The territorial creature was vast, its power comparable to Sesshomaru's own, but it was operating in an unfamiliar dimension. Sesshomaru, conversely, was now beginning to understand Earth's metaphysical framework well enough to leverage it against opponents from his own world. The battle lasted 53 minutes. By the end, the territorial creature was destroyed, scattered across New York's skyline in a display of power that left even Superman shaken. And incredibly, impossibly, the dimensional closure ritual remained intact, its sealing process continuing unimpeded despite the intensity of the conflict. When it was finished, Sesshomaru stood in the center of the UN Plaza, his demon form covered in wounds that were already healing, his expression carrying the profound exhaustion of someone who had expended enormous reserves of power while maintaining focus on multiple simultaneous objectives. The dimensional rupture sealed at hour 42, precisely as Sesshomaru had indicated. The process was visible to every camera, every sensor, every observer on Earth. The fabric of reality healed itself, the breach closing permanently, the barrier between Sesshomaru's world and humanity's world becoming once again impenetrable. Rin, watching from Themyscira, released a breath she had been holding for nearly 2 days. Superman helped Sesshomaru return to the Watchtower, the Demon Lord's power significantly depleted, his body requiring recovery time that even his supernatural regeneration would need several days to accomplish. The Justice League welcomed him back with the particular respect due to an ally who had proven himself through action rather than rhetoric. "You could have let the territorial entity kill you," Batman said, his tone carrying the observation of a strategist analyzing tactical choices. "You were vulnerable. You could have allowed the dimensional closure to fail, blamed the failure on forces beyond your control, and remained on Earth indefinitely under League protection." "I could have," Sesshomaru acknowledged, his voice slightly weaker than usual but carrying the same absolute certainty. "I did not. Because I made a commitment. I said the dimensional closure would be completed. Breaking that commitment would have been unacceptable." "Why?" Batman pressed. "You don't owe the Justice League anything. You don't owe Earth anything. You could have taken Rin and remained hidden indefinitely." Sesshomaru regarded Batman with those ancient, fathomless eyes, and for a moment, the Demon Lord seemed almost vulnerable, a being who had just expended enormous power, who was physically weakened, who could be genuinely harmed if circumstances aligned properly. "Because honor is the foundation of any meaningful alliance," Sesshomaru replied finally. "I gave my word. My word is not something I break for convenience or self-interest. That is the fundamental difference between beings of power and beings of mere strength. Strength is meaningless without honor to govern its application." Batman nodded slowly, accepting the answer. Not because he fully believed it but because he recognized that Sesshomaru genuinely believed it, and that was sufficient. Over the next 72 hours, Sesshomaru recovered in the Watchtower's medical facilities, his supernatural biology processing injuries and power depletion at a rate that fascinated medical staff and made it clear that he was operating according to completely different biological principles than any human or conventional superhero. When he was recovered sufficiently to move, Superman took him to see Rin, allowing them reunion in the Watchtower's observation deck, watching Earth rotate below them. Rin embraced Sesshomaru with the absolute certainty of someone who had never doubted that he would return, while the Demon Lord held the child with the gentleness that only centuries of power could afford. "What happens now?" Superman asked, standing at a respectful distance, understanding that some moments required privacy. Now, Sesshomaru replied, his voice carrying something approaching contentment, Rin and I remain. The dimensional barriers are sealed. The threat has been neutralized. And I find myself interested in understanding this world more thoroughly. It was not quite acceptance of permanent residence on Earth, but it was close enough. It was an acknowledgement that Sesshomaru had, whether he fully realized it or not, become part of Earth's superhero landscape. And in that transformation lay the true significance of his arrival. Conclusion. The aftermath of Sesshomaru's public demonstration in New York City fundamentally altered Earth's relationship with the supernatural and extradimensional entities. Within weeks, the United Nations established a new diplomatic framework specifically designed to negotiate with beings from alternate realities. The Justice League, which had previously operated in a nebulous space between official government sanction and independent action, suddenly found themselves recognized as Earth's de facto ambassadors to dimensional entities. Lex Luthor, for his part, abandoned his acquisition campaign with characteristic pragmatism. The CEO of LexCorp recognized when a game had been played to conclusion and lost. He did not apologize or acknowledge failure, such things were beneath him. But he did redirect LexCorp's research divisions toward projects that did not involve antagonizing beings of Sesshomaru's caliber. It was a retreat, but one conducted with the precision and dignity that only a genius strategist could manage. Sesshomaru and Rin established a permanent residence within the Watchtower, though the Demon Lord made it clear that permanent was a term subject to renegotiation if circumstances changed. He did not formally join the Justice League, instead existing as an associate member, a being whose power and strategic value were undeniable but whose autonomy remained absolute. He trained occasionally with Wonder Woman, discussed dimensional mechanics with Zatanna, and engaged in what might charitably be described as mutual respect with Batman. But his true commitment remained unchanged, Rin's safety and well-being. The child thrived in Earth's environment in ways that surprised observers who had anticipated trauma and maladjustment. She was enrolled in education programs, gradually acclimating to Earth's technological sophistication and scientific frameworks. Yet she never lost the spiritual awareness that her years in Sesshomaru's world had cultivated. In many ways, she became a bridge between the supernatural and scientific worldviews, proof that beings from radically different dimensional frameworks could coexist not through compromise but through genuine respect for different ways of understanding reality. Lex Luthor would occasionally observe Rin from a distance, still calculating, still assessing. The child represented something he had not anticipated. A being raised by a demon lord who somehow embodied the best qualities of human compassion and wisdom. She was valuable not as a resource to be extracted but as evidence that Sesshomaru's commitment to protection extended beyond strategic interest. The lesson Luthor took from this observation was subtle but profound: some acquisitions were not worth the price they demanded. Superman found himself developing something approaching genuine friendship with Sesshomaru, though the Demon Lord would likely have rejected the term as overly sentimental. They would stand together in the observation deck, watching Earth rotate, discussing power, responsibility, and the weight of being stronger than almost everything else in existence. Superman would speak of growing up on a farm in Kansas, learning human values before learning the extent of his alien power. Sesshomaru would speak, rarely but significantly, of centuries of solitude before Rin had given his existence meaning beyond conquest. "You were like me once," Superman said during one such conversation. "Powerful and alone." "I was like you, yes," Sesshomaru replied. "But I chose solitude. You were forced into it by circumstances. The distinction matters. I learned to value isolation because power did not require companionship. You learned to value others despite possessing power. That is a far more significant achievement." It was perhaps the closest Sesshomaru came to offering genuine compliment, and Superman accepted it with the understanding that such expressions of respect from a being of Sesshomaru's caliber were worth more than elaborate declarations of admiration. Wonder Woman, conversely, found in Sesshomaru a kindred spirit, a warrior who understood honor codes and the weight of ancient responsibility. They would spar occasionally, their battles shaking the Watchtower's reinforced structures but never causing actual harm. There was something almost ritualistic about these encounters, a recognition between two beings of comparable power that combat could be an expression of respect rather than conflict. Batman maintained his distance, as was his way. But he allocated significant resources toward understanding yokai biology, dimensional mechanics, and the theoretical frameworks that govern Sesshomaru's existence. If the Justice League was ever forced to confront Sesshomaru as an enemy, a scenario that Batman's paranoid strategic mind insisted on considering, comprehensive knowledge of his capabilities would be essential. This was not betrayal of trust so much as the pragmatic recognition that trust and contingency planning were not mutually exclusive. 6 months after the dimensional closure, Zatanna published a groundbreaking paper on comparative magical systems, giving Sesshomaru a co-author credit despite the Demon Lord's initial reluctance. The paper fundamentally altered humanity's understanding of magic, suggesting that Western practitioners had been operating under artificially constrained paradigms. It opened doors for collaboration between magical traditions that had previously considered each other incompatible or inferior. More importantly, it established Sesshomaru as not just a powerful entity but a contributor to human knowledge and advancement. He was no longer an anomaly to be contained or managed. He was a resource, a teacher, a being whose existence enriched human understanding of the cosmos. In the Watchtower's observation deck, on a night when Earth's moon was full and the stars seemed unusually bright, Sesshomaru stood with Rin, pointing out considerations. The folder was labeled, as were all his most dangerous threat assessments: probable ally, possible enemy. But Batman had recently added a new addendum: current assessment, ally. Certainty level, 87%. Note, certainty increases with every demonstration of genuine emotional commitment to Rin. Observe for further evolution. Contingencies remain necessary but increasingly appear to represent paranoia rather than pragmatism. It was, coming from Batman, perhaps the highest compliment possible. Superman, standing beside Batman as he filed the updated assessment, smiled slightly. "You're getting soft," the Man of Steel said. 87% certainty. That's almost trusting. Trust is a luxury, Batman replied, closing the file. But competent allies who honor their commitments are worth maintaining. Sesshomaru is both. That makes him valuable beyond his power level. The question that would eventually need to be answered, but which Superman and Batman tacitly agreed could wait for another day, was simple: how long would Sesshomaru remain on Earth? His commitment was to Rin's safety and well-being. As the child grew older, as she became more integrated into Earth's civilization and more independent, would the Demon Lord's reason for remaining become less compelling? Superman suspected the answer was more complex than simple causality would suggest. Sesshomaru had been transformed by his time on Earth not just through the specific relationship with Rin but through the broader experience of learning that power could serve purposes beyond dominion. That transformation was not easily reversed. But it was, Superman acknowledged, always a variable to monitor. In the years that would follow, Sesshomaru would become a permanent fixture of Earth's superhero landscape. He would face threats alongside the Justice League, cosmic entities, interdimensional invaders, threats that required his specific combination of ancient power and rapidly evolving understanding of Earth's systems. He would mentor younger heroes, teaching them that true strength lay not in overwhelming power but in the discipline to use power according to principles that transcended mere victory. And perhaps most importantly, he would demonstrate, through his example, that beings from radically different worlds and dimensional frameworks could learn not just to coexist but to genuinely value each other. The dimensional breach that had brought Sesshomaru and Rin to Earth was permanently closed, its rupture sealed by the most powerful being Earth had encountered since Superman's arrival. The threat of dimensional incursion was neutralized. The parasitic creatures that had threatened Earth were no longer a concern. But the arrival itself, the collision of a feudal demon lord and his adopted human child with Earth's greatest superhero team, would echo through human history for generations to come. Because it answered a fundamental question that had haunted human philosophy since the first records of contact with the superhuman: could beings of vastly different power levels, different moral frameworks, and different dimensional origins learn not just to tolerate each other but to genuinely respect each other? The answer, as Sesshomaru and the Justice League would prove, was yes. Not without conflict. Not without misunderstanding. Not without sacrifice. But yes. And in a universe of infinite complexity, where power and purpose so often diverged, that answer was perhaps the most valuable discovery any civilization could make. Stronger than yesterday. More stories await.